A little girl with starry eyes and lots of dreams got onto a stage like this when she was all of 3 years of age, memorizing the nice little story that her mother had meticulously taught her. She wowed the audience with that tiny little story and won the first prize in English storytelling in the kindergarten section. And she fell in love with stories that day. At 4, she put on the dress of the great Adi Shankara for a fancy dress competition and won a prize in that. And she fell in love with Indian heritage and tales and legends of mythology and culture that day. At 5, she started facing cameras and appeared in the famous Doordarshan channels of India that day. And she fell in love with flashes and cameras. At 6, she was taught by one of her favorite teachers as to how to act in a play. And she got onto the stage doing that. And she fell in love with theater that day. And life went on and on, with her falling in love again and again with numerous such pursuits and passions. And today, she is in love with life. With the kind of intro that I gave, a regular guess might be that the person is a remarkable artist or a film star or say a theater artist or a performing artist today. But let me tell you, you're wrong. The person is a medical doctor and an IAS officer today. Now, how did this happen? Ever since I got into civil services, which is not too long ago, especially the last 1 year which I've spent in my district as the assistant collector, life has taken a very fresh spin for me for good. And one of the finest things that my job gives me is the kind of versatility of the platform that it provides me to work in. As part of that, I have been fortunate enough to meet a lot of young people like you, very enthusiastic, people filled with dreams and ideas. And as I interacted with students, especially school children, more and more, there was one question that was oft repeated at me, which was, how to do it all? How did you do it all? That was a very curious thing that everybody thought. How could you be an artist and a doctor and a writer and a civil servant, etc., etc.? My answer to them was, and it still is, that, well, when I was a child, nobody ever told me that it was impossible to do it all. Nobody ever told me that it was abnormal or it was uncommon to be doing several things at the same time. And as I started reading about versatility, I came across this tiny little story which I think enunciates this point very clearly, which I would want to share with you all today. There was a zoologist who once came to Kerala in order to study which animal? Kerala, obviously the land of elephants, right? So he came to study elephants here, and he looked at the numerous tamed elephants which had been chained with heavy iron links. And there was one place where he went to, where in the elephant shed, he met the mahout and saw that a huge elephant was tied to a little tree with a rope, as if you tie a cattle to a tree or a plant or to a stone. And the scientist was flabbergasted. He said, why is it that this elephant, which can so easily break this rope and run away, not running away? What is the secret behind it? And the mahout told him, we got him when he was tiny, when he was just born. He was a baby elephant when he came into my hands. And at that point of time, this rope was more than enough to keep him in place. And when we raised him, we inculcated that fear in him and the belief in him that this tiny rope is the biggest obstacle and hurdle in your life which you will never be able to break. And that elephant, despite having grown this huge, does not realize that it has the strength and the power to break that tiny rope, to flung it away, and to walk away free. I think this is what society does to each one of us as children. Restrictions, barriers, boundaries, in the form of such tiny threads and ropes, which probably as children we find it as humongous tasks. But as we grow up, we fail to recognize different facets of us, different colors of ourselves, and different capabilities of ourselves because of the restrictions and the barriers that we ourselves and the society has built for us. And once we try to break the shackles of the self-built boundaries and barriers, I think versatility is all yours. And I'm sure that each one of you is versatile here. It is just that probably many of us don't realize that we are versatile, and we don't take time off in order to express ourselves in numerous fields ourselves. So why be versatile? That is the next question, right? So why should you be versatile? Well, let's start off with an area which I probably know the best even now, which is science. Who is the greatest scientist the world has ever seen? Everybody would say Albert Einstein, right? So Albert Einstein himself has revealed that music has been the driving force behind most of his scientific inventions and discoveries. In fact, the photograph of Albert Einstein with a fiddle in his hand, with a violin in his hand, is one of the most loved photographs in the scientific world even today. Come to India's gift to the scientific world, the great Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Which instrument did he play? The rare Rudraveena, if you remember. Not just the two stalwarts in scientific fields, but if you look at the Nobel Prize winners in fields of science and physics, chemistry, medicine, etc., it's been found that more than 60% of them have excelled in one art form or another. And in fact, when people started researching behind this, they did find out that we do know the functions of the left brain and the right brain. The cerebrum of the human beings is divided into left and right lobes. And each lobe has got specialized functions of its own. And when you inculcate versatility as a pursuit of yours, what you're helping the brain do is to develop the left and the right lobes of the brain equally well. And thus, you become a much more holistic person, even scientifically. It helps you establish new neuronal connections every time you start indulging yourself in a new pursuit or a new passion that you want to continue. And from there, let me go to the next advantage of being versatile. Versatility, through this whole process in itself, I would call is the ambrosia of human beings to remain young. It keeps you eternally young. How does it? Every time you start indulging yourself in a new pursuit, what are you essentially doing? You unlearn and shed all that you have learned till that point of time, come back to ground zero, start from the humble novice person who doesn't know anything in that field, and start off all over again. Now this arises the curiosity in you, and the joys of discovery keeps you young forever and ever. Another wonderful human being who is arguably, I would say, he's been my role model ever since childhood, Rabindranath Tagore, the great Gurudev. He is an example for this. At the age of 60, he realized that he had a penchant for painting and drawing, and he became an artist. He started painting at the age of 60. I don't know how many people know that. And we have a school of painting after him in India, after all. You know, there's a Tagore school of painting even. He was someone who was relentless in his discovery of his own self and never shied away from adventures. Which leads me to the next point, which is versatility always pushes you and nudges you to take that last mile into plunging into an adventure and innovating. And I would in fact call versatility as a crucible for innovations. Because you're ready to take the risk, you're ready to learn, you're ready to come back to ground zero, and if you have your hands on multiple items at the same time, you tend to make these uncanny linkages, which is what we generally call as thinking out of the box, or we call as lateral thinking. And where does lateral thinking come from? It, after all, comes from your exposure to various things. Some of you might have known there was a little song which I had made and sung for electioneering as part of my duty for a sweep campaign, which almost went viral on social media. And I was taken aback at that point of time because I thought I have sung so many songs in my life and suddenly this thing just takes off. And I was wondering as to why it happened so. So one of my mentors, one of my teachers in fact, told me that it's not because you sang a song, it was because the purpose for which you sang a song was new to people. That is the reason why it took off. So that uncanny linkages of putting that, of putting that square peg into the round hole and still making it fit there, that is what the versatile mind does in order to innovate. We all talk about specialization these days, and everybody wants specialization in various fields. In fact, the civil services itself is under the attack of this specialization debate, I would say. I agree that specialization has done a lot to humanity in terms of advancement of progress, but innovation, I think, is a fruit that comes out of specialization only when cross-pollination of ideas happen. And the bed on which cross-pollination of these ideas happen is nothing but versatility. So, there is one more aspect of versatility which I want to share with you before I wrap up, which is that every time in life as you move ahead, we always find goals as destination. We talk about goals as goalposts. When you're versatile, what happens is that goalposts are no longer destinations, but they are just starting points for your next journey, for your next adventure. And thus, this concept of dynamic goals keeps happening in your life all the time. You have reached somewhere that's only the starting point of the next race which you're going to run, because you never stop. Because once you have achieved something, your life doesn't end there. The famous entrepreneur and innovator of IKEA, the Swedish or the European chain market, which you would know, Ingmar Kamprad once said that any organization which feels that it has attained its goal tends to stagnate quickly. And it applies not just to organizations, it applies to human minds, it applies to human beings. Once we think that we have reached our goal, there we stop thinking, we stop learning, we start stagnating, we start rotting, and there boredom sets in. Once you start being versatile, there is no question of boredom, trust me. You just keep growing and blooming and growing and blooming and spreading more and more fragrance. That's what happens. And what happens when you start interacting with people from multiple fields, from multiple domains, from multiple cultures? When you're being versatile, there is also another dimension of humanness that creeps into you, which is the part of social sensitization. When you work with artists, as an artist, you get to know what their world is like. When you work with officers in a government setting, you get to know what their world is like. When you work with people in the film industry, you get to know what their world is like. With so much of exposure, you're actually learning human beings more and more and more. In fact, in Japan, you would have all heard of the samurai warriors, the great samurai warriors. They were in the good old ancient days. The samurai warriors were made to sit down under a cherry tree and write poems. Can you believe that? Samurai warriors and poems. Why on earth? They were made to write poems so that they have a more gentle attitude towards human beings when they retire from the battlefield and come back. And in fact, it did work. Just sitting under the cherry tree was, told to create an empathy for nature, and people started connecting with nature. And writing a poem made people connect with human beings, and they started looking at other human beings in a different fashion, in a much more gentler fashion. So, what does all of this put together give us? A good leader, ain't it? Someone who can connect with people, someone who has empathy, someone who is socially sensitive, someone who can think out of the box, someone who can innovate, someone who can reset and refashion goals according to the needs of the time, and someone who is self-motivated and is driven from within. What more do you need to have an adaptable leader? And that is what versatility finally gifts you with. Let me just wrap up with one tiny example. If you remember, many of you would have had a tiny little phone, probably a decade or two ago, which now has become an antique piece, I suppose, which we used to call the brick model of the phone or so, which used to do one or two functions really, really well, isn't it? Even now, we all say that the battery life of those phones, you can never beat them, right? But we still don't use those phones today, isn't it? Even though the battery life is good, even though you could use the phone to make that one call and have a clear conversation without any breaks, even though you could send SMSs from those phones. Today, people like Siju and all the other engineers sitting here, all the other entrepreneurs sitting here, all of you have tried to incorporate numerous functionality into that tiny handheld device called the mobile phone. And what have you essentially done to it? You have discovered, you have brought about a revolution by just making that humble brick phone much more versatile, right? And now you call it the smartphone, right? When it does so many functions. So this is the era of smartphones, and for you all to become smart human beings, what do you need to do? Be versatile, okay? So live life smart, live life versatile, live life meaningful. Thank you so much.